Welcome back to NPTEL, the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning, being brought to you by the Indian Institutes of Technology and the Indian Institute of Science. As you are aware, this is a course on English language and literature, and the course is being shared by Professor Krishna Borua, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati, and me. The topic of discussion today is modern English. We are at the end, almost at the end of the second module, and you remember that the second module has been devoted entirely to the history of the English language. We began with an introduction to the history of the English language in general, and we have been through several known and established phases in the as far as the history of the English language is concerned. And today we come to modern English, and well, it is safe to say that there are varying and varied even I may say versions of how people how people talk about in the first place, or even certain disagreements regarding the very term modern English. As you know, this is a basic level course whose target audience comprises engineering students in various engineering institutes in India, and we stick to, if I may use the word, maybe more or less a traditionalist model of understanding English language and literature. The many varieties, the many controversies, etc., are those that are usually addressed at higher levels, or for instance in departments of English or in major courses, etc. Right. So, welcome then to the fifth lecture in module 2 of English language and literature. As usual, we will do a quick recap of the last lecture. And in the last lecture, on which was early modern English, you will recall that there were a few important developments during that period, right, which affected the further growth and development of the English language. And here, till here we are largely in the context of the English language in England. We, for instance, found that the coming of the printing press was an immensely important, not only social, but many would say even a linguistic phenomenon. Not the least was also the growth of popular education, obviously following the availability of reading material coming from the establishment of the printing press. There was also increased communication during that period of the history of English language, and it is but natural that there would be a further growth of social consciousness with increased communication, with popular education, finally emanating from the establishment of the printing press. Then we had occasion to look at, as you know, A.C. Baugh, Albert Baugh's book is a classic as far as the history of the English language is concerned. There definitely have been so many books, but one would always recommend that you have a copy of A.C. Baugh's classic text. And we found in Baugh's text, let us read again from Baugh's History of English Language, the real force behind the use of English was a popular demand. And what was this demand? The demand of all sorts of men in practical life to share in the fruits, to share in the fruits of the Renaissance. Do you remember the Renaissance was the revival of learning, the revival in particular, in many cases the revival of classical learning. So, here as Baugh says, the real force behind the use of English was to be attributed to a popular demand among people to share. Everyone, people from almost all classes had a desire, wished to share the fruits of the Renaissance. Next, the revival of learning had revealed how rich was the store of knowledge and experience preserved from the civilizations of Greece and Rome. The ancients had not only lived, but had thought about life and drawn practical conclusions from experience. This is particularly what everyone wanted to know, okay, not to partake not just of what is called high classical learning or abstract ideas, philosophies maybe, but the population realized, okay, many of the population realized that the ancients had not only lived, but had also thought about life and drawn practical conclusions from experience. And this was one of the things that was sort of found desirable, that was found necessary to emulate, to learn and to develop as far as the population was concerned. Further, we found also that much was to be learned from their discussion of conduct. This is very important, discussion of conduct and ethics, and as you know, ethics is one of the very important branches of philosophy, both classical and modern. Their ideas of government and the state, that is of politics, their political precepts, their theories of education, and their knowledge of military science and the like. Okay. So, there was, as Baugh tells us, and we see in the previous slide also, okay, all these contributed to the growth of the language. Next, we also saw, we went further and explored the phenomenon of the rapid spread of popular education during that time, and we found that literacy was becoming more and more common. In Shakespeare's London, almost more than half of the people could read. And in the 17th and 18th centuries, there was an increase in the number of schools, and the tradesman class arose who obtained education. The rise of the middle class, particularly following, particularly with the Industrial Revolution, the rise of the mercantile class, the rise of mercantile capitalism, okay, was also one of the, I would say, one of the most important phenomena in England, in the history of England. And there was the tradesman class who also, sought not just success in their mercantile endeavors, but also success as far as learning, education. And as we saw in the previous slide by the quotation from A.C. Baugh, also a desire to know things classic, to know things Greek and Roman. So, therefore, many have also called it the problem of enrichment. For instance, do we look at it as enrichment, or do we look at it as borrowing? For instance, we have the borrowing of words from Latin. Obviously, if your the target of your knowledge is classical Greek and Latin, obviously you would borrow. Okay, it follows that you would wish to borrow among other parts of their language and learning system. You want to borrow words. Okay. So, the enrichment was also seen as a problem, in the sense that it was seen that probably too many words were filtering into a language, which may have also been seen by many as a threat, okay, to the sort of indigeneity of English, as it had of Anglo-Saxon English, as it had developed from the times of the Jutes, Saxons and the Angles. Okay. Then also when we look at this, again, this phenomenon of for and against the borrowing of words, A.C. Baugh says the wholesale borrowing of words from other languages did not meet with universal favor. The strangeness, as said, this is what I mentioned just a while ago, the strangeness of the new words was an objection to some people. However, people like the poet, for instance, the Augustan poet John Dryden, approved of the practice of judicious, what he called judicious importations from the classical languages. And we also know, if those of you who are acquainted, you may also look up the lectures in the next module, which are on various periods of English language and literature, in particular the period of Dryden, for instance, okay, which is know it also as a neoclassical revival phase of English literature. Okay. So poets like John Dryden, for instance, in the 18th century approved of the practice of judicious importations. Well, now let us come back after this recap. Let us come back to our topic at hand, which we know is modern English, and there are several texts that you may look up as far as modern English is concerned, but let me declare at the outset that my text is largely based on this time. It is not a conventional traditional text. This time it is a text that is published on the net, and you will find several very interesting, very very informative paragraphs in that, and that is the history of English. Okay, and I have given the link here. You may follow this link and try to read up the entire material, from which I shall be quoting quite extensively, and this is to ensure that I am quoting that to let you know that this is the text on which from which we will be reading and trying to understand, and I shall be trying to explain the points mentioned there. Okay. Now, as I said, there are probably many ways when for us to look at the phenomenon of of modern English. Okay, you can talk about modern English from the point of view of global English. For instance, you can talk about modern English from the point of view of what is today known as international English, and this is something that we had seen in the last module. Global English, the globalization of English was also one of the topics in our last module. Okay, so if you go by the author of this text, this online text, there are one or two issues which he says are very important. For instance, vocabulary. Okay, this is also a point we had seen in the last lecture when we talk about early modern English, and vocabulary, the contribution of other other languages, the contribution of new developments within the mother country, for instance, and how they add to the repertoire of words is one of the key and most important, I would say most important points as far as the history of any language is concerned. Okay, because the coming in of new vocabulary, or what we call new words, or what we call neologisms. Okay, these are among the factors, including along with changes in grammar, right? Major changes in grammar, for instance, in pronunciation, etc., that keep the growth of a language growing. So, vocabulary is one such important marker, if we may use, an extensive growth of vocabulary, okay, in the modern English. So, this is the first thing that we shall be taking up. Now, according to the text, the history of English language, there are two important socio-political happenings, or you could say phases that are important. We know that language does not change or grow in a vacuum. We also know that words do not get added to the repertoire, vocabulary or repertoire of a language by itself. We also know by now that certain political changes certain social changes, economic changes, of course, are of immense value, and we need to look at those even if we have to come back to the growth of the language to see what happens after such changes. So, as we see here, two socio-political events, that is events in the sense of these are of course over time, but let's call them events here. The events are the Industrial Revolution in England and the growth of the English Empire. You are aware that of the of the growth of the English Empire overseas, okay, beyond the mother country, following the several successful attempts at colonization, okay, by the British Empire. So, now let us see how these this aspect of vocabulary is kind of explored, okay, and discussed in the text that we are borrowing from. Okay. Now, when we look at the issue of science and technology, obviously when we have the Industrial Revolution, okay, which is backed by tremendous growth in science in England, with the scientific laws by Newton, and for instance to the invention of machines, the steam engine for instance, okay, and the rise of technology as we have seen here. Science and technology would give us new materials, okay, new machines, new means and improved means of transportation. Please look at this slide here, and manufacture. Okay. So, what are the points here, and from where we are going to see the rise of neologisms, the rise of new vocabulary? These are following science and technology, as we have mentioned just a while ago. New materials being used, okay, new machines being built, transportation, new means of transportation and of manufacture. Now, let us look at this slide, and I am here quoting from the history of English, as you can see here, and I would urge you to follow this, to read up the entire text, which is quite well written. Okay. Now, let us read from here. Most of the innovations of the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th and early 19th century were of British origin, including the harnessing of steam to drive heavy machinery. Let us read this again. Most of the innovations, okay, of the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th and 19th century were of British origin, including the harnessing of steam to drive heavy machinery, the development of, it says here, new materials, techniques and equipment in a range of manufacturing industries, and the emergence of new means of transportation, example steamships, railways. At least half of the influential scientific and technological output between 1750 and 1900 was written, this is very important, was written in English. Another English speaking country, the USA, continued the English language dominance of new technology and innovation with inventions like electricity, the telegraph, the telephone, the phonograph, the sewing machine and the computer. As you see here, this text clearly refers to the growth, okay, the tremendous growth in manufacturing industries, in materials, techniques, equipment, which began, even though later on the USA had so many other inventions, okay, in this domain, but it was obvious that in the 18th, beginning from the 18th century, many of these new technologies, new industries, new materials were developed in Britain. Okay. So, therefore, what are the new words that come in here? Okay. And I am borrowing this from the text at hand. The industrial and scientific advances of the Industrial Revolution created a need, obviously created a need for new words, need for neologisms to describe the new creations and discoveries. To a large extent, this relied on the classical language, extremely important. Even now, when you go to look at the words in English, there are so many words, okay, that whose prefixes are and also suffixes are of Greek and Latin origin. Okay. So, in order to have to coin new words, okay, or neologisms following these tremendous changes in science and technology that were taking place, what was happening was there was a need to look at the classical languages Latin and Greek, in which scholars and scientists of the period were usually well versed. So, this was, you see, look at this, just before this we had what? We had the revival of learning. You can see the connection, and you can see, if I may use the word, the sheer almost inevitability of what was going to happen, okay, when new words were coined. Who are they going to look at? They are going to look back to their love for Greek and Latin, the love for the classical languages, following what? Following the Renaissance, okay, the revival of learning, following or with running together with the growth of neoclassicism. Do you follow? Okay, so again let me read this again. To a large extent this relied on the classical languages Latin and Greek, in which scholars and scientists of the period, remember, were well versed. It is very important for us to realize that being well versed in a language in those times and also today is not just what word should I use? It's not just the talent, okay, of only the literary person or the one person who is doing philology, okay, or the person who is studying languages. Okay. There were many scientists, okay, in the 17th, 18th centuries who while they are doing their sciences, okay, were concurrently, okay, very aware of Greek of classical training. Do you understand? Okay. So, for instance, we have words like oxygen, right, protein. So, what were these new words that were being formed? Okay. Some of these words, for instance, were oxygen, okay, protein, nuclear, vaccine. These did not exist in the classical languages. They could be and were perhaps also created from Latin and Greek roots, right. As far as optics is concerned, for instance, you have words like lens, okay, refraction, electron, and in biology, in the biological sciences, you are coming words like chromosome, chloroform, okay, and you also had bacteria. Then other words like claustrophobia, see claustro and phobia, okay. This is how they were merging the words. These are just some of the few examples which have been cited in the text that we are following for this lecture. Okay. These words, these are science based words, as it says, are created during this period of scientific innovation, along with a whole lot of words, okay, ending with ologies and onomies. For instance, biology, petrology, morphology, entomology, okay, ethnology, taxonomy, paleontology, etc. So, these are all words that have been formed by taking recourse etymologically to the classical languages, to Latin and Greek. Okay. Now, as far it is not just the science that we are talking about. It's not, we are not talking only of processes, for instance. Okay, we saw in we saw a couple of slides ago that there were new products, there were new machines, and following the rise of several kinds of manufacturing industry. Okay, so following that, let's see the words that have been mentioned in this text, and what the new words that come up are train, engine, reservoir, pulley, combustion, piston, and other words like condenser, electricity, telephone, telegraph, lithograph, camera, etc. We also had new meanings given to words that had existed at least in some form, okay, and the words that got new meanings during this time were vacuum, cylinder, apparatus, pump, siphon, locomotive, factory, etc. Now, I urge you to follow the link that I have provided in this lecture. Go to the link, look up the text there, look up the slides there, and you will understand, you will get a whole many more words there. Okay. This is just to give you an example of how modern English began. Really, it is safe to say that modern English, one of the most important aspects of modern English is vocabulary, and we have already linked it to the socio-political processes, scientific processes and technological processes that were gaining rapid ground during this time. Now, the other point that I had mentioned was of empire. If you remember, it was a growth following colonization, the growth of the British Empire. As you know, all of us know Indian history, we know that in India too we had the British reigning here for several years, and there are words, it is not that there was the English language coming in to India, okay, English words coming into India, but we also have words from our languages, okay, which became a part also in Australia, for instance, and so many other parts of the Commonwealth. Okay. There are words, if you look at the slide here, in fact, you can see the foreign loan words here, right. Following empire and the growth of the empire, these were the foreign loan words. For instance, from Australia we have boomerang, kangaroo. Okay. From India we have words like pajamas, bungalow, even the word cot, shampoo, okay, loot, bangle, jungle, etc. These are the words we will find in any English dictionary, and this is a time, as I said, the many words were coming in from following the growth of empire. Now, also the one very important point that we can never miss when we talk about about modern English is the American variant. Okay. The American variant, if I may use, this is quite politically loaded to say the American variant of English, because today we talk about American English. Okay. So, that it's safe to say the varieties of English. Now, in American English we find two phases really, the phase beginning 1600, the phase following the coming of the Pilgrim Fathers, right. The phase 1600 to 1783 and from 1783 onwards. This is there is a phenomenon known as language freeze. Now, let us read this from the text. Interestingly, some English pronunciations and usages froze when they arrived in America, while they continued to evolve in Britain itself. It is interesting. Okay. So, with the Pilgrim Fathers, you have they have brought the English language and their words and the words in the English language. It so happened that when they settled in America, they tended to preserve those words in their original form, right. So, sort of that is why they use the word freeze, okay, language freeze. Now, some English pronunciations, okay, and even usages, as it says quote unquote froze when the British arrived in America, while they, interestingly, even ironically perhaps, they continued to evolve, they continued to change in Britain itself. This is also sometimes referred to as the colonial lag. Okay, that is sort of as if the words have lagged behind in their whole process of development and natural change. Okay. So, as the author here says, interestingly, some English pronunciations and usages froze when they arrived in America, while they continued to evolve in Britain itself, sometimes referred to as a colonial lag. So that in some respects American English is, this is very interesting. Okay. American English in some respects is closer to Shakespearean English. Why? As we have seen, one of the reasons is this colonial lag or the freezing of these, as many would perhaps believe, this pristine sort of pronunciation and usages, right. So that in some respects American English is closer to the English of Shakespeare than modern British English is. Perhaps, and the best example here they give is of this word gotten, G-O-T-T-E-N. Gotten is a word which is not used in India usually used in India as far as my experience goes. Okay. Gotten is a word used in American English, and the best known example that is the author gives here is of the use of gotten, which has long since faded from its use in Britain. Okay. Even though the with the prefix for, forgotten is still very much a part of modern British. Okay. So, where do you get my point? It is not necessary that just because the language comes late from the mother country to a new country, to a new colony, it does, and it does not mean that the new colony is going to change this just because it came from the mother country. The very usage and pronunciations and the form of the word will remain the same as if it is frozen in time, and as we saw here, gotten is a very clear example. Now, further the text says the American use of words like fall, okay, the word fall for autumn. For British, in Britain we use the word autumn, in India too we use the word autumn, though increasingly I find many students even in IIT here refer to autumn as fall. Okay. But the American use of words like fall for British autumn, trash for rubbish, hog for pig, sick for ill, and guess for think are all examples of these kind of anachronistic British word usage. Okay. Now, there are also other words that were kept. Okay. These words were kept even in American English, even though they were, as it says here, they were dropped from the general common British usage here. Okay. These words are like burly, greenhorn, talented and scant. Right. This says the America kept several words such as burly, greenhorn, talented and scant that had been largely dropped in Britain, although some since have recovered. Do you understand? And other words, words like lumber and words like lot also which change. It is not that all these words were sort of frozen, all the words they had brought were frozen. Okay. They began to have very particular sort of, maybe we say American context meanings. Okay. These were words like lumber or words like lot, right. So, till now what did we find? We found 2 or 3 important points. Okay. These were that modern English really can be traced back to 2 very important socio political economic phenomena, and these were the Industrial Revolution, okay, and the rise or the growth of the British Empire. And we saw, particularly in the case of vocabulary, this is immensely important, and we saw that when science grew, when technology grew, and when we had to name new machines, we had to name new processes, scientific processes, what happens is you have to think of how to build new words, and as I said, it was historically possible, it was historically almost you could say inevitable that these scholars, scientists also, and these manufacturers would turn to the previous age of the revival of the Greek and Latin, okay, the revival of classical learning to coin their new words. Okay. So, this part can never be exaggerated. Okay. Many scholars feel the sociological, sociocultural processes behind it. The second was, of course, again a very important point, that was the coming of the Pilgrim Fathers to America, okay, and the change in American English. On the one hand, as we saw, there was this refusal to let certain words change, right. That which we call language freeze or colonial lag. There were also words that were retained that were almost nearly dropped in British English, and also we found that there are words that were like lumber and log, which came to have very specific American meanings because of the American context, because of the kinds of employment, for instance, that the kind of terrain even would impact or have an impact on the kind of words that were being used. So, one lesson, very important lesson we get here is language is not just a mental phenomenon. Okay, language is not just a tool to communicate. Language is not just a faculty that we have. Okay, the important thing is language is tied. The growth, especially when you study the history of any language in any part of the world for that matter, you can never change, or sorry, can never delink it from the important socio-cultural processes. You cannot delink it from even the environment, the terrain. You cannot delink it from the kind of jobs people do. Do you understand? Okay. So, this is the beauty of learning language from the historical perspective. And you see these counterparts, you see this concomitantly happening. Language is changing while the socio-cultural scenario is also changing. Further, also we have native, if you look at this slide here please, okay, some of the words that we have picked up from our source text, Native American words like raccoon. Now, you may think that these words are really originally English words, but we find that these are Native American words which have been added, which were taken up by the colonizing population, okay, and has become, these words have become part of the English language and the dictionary, and these are animals like raccoon, then opossum, moose, chipmunk, skunk. Then the word tomato, for instance, okay, tomato, squash, and the word hickory, right. So, these are the words which were part. Remember, we are dealing with vocabulary in this part of the lecture, okay. So, these were became part of the English language. Now, let us see this quotation from Thomas Jefferson in the early part of the 19th century in 1813, which is mentioned in in this web text that we have. This is what Jefferson commented: "The new circumstances under which we are placed call for new words, new phrases, and for the transfer of old words to new objects. An American dialect will therefore be formed." Now, let us look at this again, it is very interesting. Jefferson said, the new circumstances under which we are placed. Now, this call for, this demand, the new circumstances demand that there should be new words, there should be new phrases to describe, to inhabit this new, these new conditions. He says, call for new words, new phrases, and for the transfer of old words to new objects. And he says an American dialect will therefore be formed. So, there is also this, the sense of nationalist pride, okay, the need to have not just a variant, and I would say here not even a dialect. The word dialect today bring a very politically charged word, because which language do you call the dialect, and why should one language be called a dialect and another language be called a language proper, okay. These are important ideological issues. But what Jefferson, we find here, we are pointing to a sort of nationalist pride in wanting to devise a new language and say a new language or new dialect will therefore be formed, because we have new conditions and new situations. The next person which we have to talk about, okay, was very important in this desire for a new language, for a new vocabulary in particular, is, if you look at the slide, Noah Webster. Okay. Now, the word Webster immediately will bring to your mind the Webster's dictionary. So, this was an attempt being made in the US, okay, to form or formulate maybe new words and differences in spelling. For instance, if you look at the slide here, one of the most common things that we notice in American text is, see the words color and honor. Now, if I ask you quiz, what is missing here? You definitely would say the word color should be spelled color, and the word honor should be, that is, the U is missing in both cases. Okay. So, there was an attempt being made by Noah Webster to sort of prune, okay, to prune certain things which he found, and many of his contemporaries found, that they were, why do we need, when you say color, why do we need to have the U there? Okay. So, prune these words, okay, cleanse or clean this the words that are there. Traveler, jeweler, okay, why have a double L when a single L would do? Where they probably saw it as streamlining, okay, existing English words, and which, for instance, they saw the U in color and the double L in traveler probably as idiosyncrasies of a past time. Okay. So, also as we look at the slide here, please, Noah Webster's attempt here, the new words were, new variants of, new spellings were theatre, center, color, honor, traveler, jeweler, check. For check, as you know, the British English, we use the word check here. Mask, M-A-S-Q-U-E, okay, mask, check and mask. Defense and offense, we use a C here, okay, where in fact many of my PhD students ask me, madam, should we write defense as with a C or defense with an S? So, defense sorry, and offense, plow, P-O-L-O-W for P-L-O-U-G-H. So, these are all British okay, spellings, and these are their American counterparts, as the attempt was more or less successfully made by Noah Webster. And also the word, an important word, really interesting rather, is aluminum. So, you do not have the I here, okay, you take out the I, you have aluminum, right. There is no need apparently to find the word aluminium, right. So, Webster is in any extended discussion of American English, okay, the first name that would come to our mind, of course, is the name of Noah Webster. Now, I am reading from the next point. Now, there are several points really to be discussed as far as vocabulary is concerned, and the next point is very important. This is what marks, I would say, modernity, and if we talk about modern English, okay, not simply from the not simply from the point of view of just changes in grammar, for instance, changes in other linguistic ways. Of course, you can never dealing them, as I said, from the political. Okay. So, inclusiveness and political correctness, these are the two new things that we find in, or new points that we find in the text that we are dealing with. Okay. Now, let us read from this text. The push for political correctness and inclusiveness in the last third of the 20th century, particularly by homosexuals, feminists and visible minority groups, led to a reassessment of the popular usage of many words. This is very important, okay. As difference, okay, as difference, whether it is a sexual difference, whether it is difference as far as various issues of culture are concerned, okay, there is, as you understand, the one of the hallmarks of modernity is, of course, to accommodate. If not to accommodate, it is to recognize the heterogeneity in culture, in sexuality. Okay. So, the text here says that particularly in cases of homosexuality, in cases of feminism, of women's rights and of the rights of minorities, there has been I would say almost a radical, okay, reassessment of the way in which we use words. Okay, the way as he says here, the popular usage of many words. Okay. Next, keep reading. Feminists called into question the underlying sexism in language. Example, words like mankind. Okay, now when we are taught that the word mankind includes, okay, both men and women, but feminists would say, no, we can't have a word with only man, because as many feminist linguists have also pointed out, okay, mankind at some maybe psychological or cognitive level may lead you to a woman to think, wait, am I included here or not? Do you understand? Okay. So, the seemingly innocent word mankind today is no longer as innocent as you may, or free of any political gender connotations as you may find. So, words like mankind, chairman, mailman, etc. Okay. So, the privileging of man, the term man has been through, as I said, a radical reassessment, giving rise to words like, as chairperson. Okay, so instead of chairman, you use the word chairperson, because it is not necessary that every time the person who is chairing either a department or chairing a meeting or chairing a session is a man. Okay, so chairperson is then the supposedly gender neutral term. Okay, and these changes have come about and characterize one part of what we call modern English. So, feminists have called into question the underlying sexism in language, example mankind, chairman, mailman, etc. And some have even gone to the lengths of positing her story. Now, as an alternative to his story, history is seen as meaning his story. So, the word her story, and those of you who are interested in feminist theory, in feminist concepts, in feminist language, for instance, okay, some of you may have come across the word her story. Okay, that is a story from could be a story from a single woman's point of view, but could also be history, entire history of a nation or of a community, or of any phenomenon, okay, in the social sciences and humanities, narrated, okay, from a female perspective. Do you follow? So, words like her story have come into the English language precisely in this bid to form a reassessment, okay, of the use of popular words, and to coin, here again we find her story is a new word, it is a neologism, coining of neologisms depending on the reassessment of usage of words. Then next the text mentions here, for a time strong objections were voiced at the inherent racism underlying words like, for instance, blacklist, blackguard, blackmail and blackboard. Okay. We have moved from the disparaging term negro. Okay. We no longer refer to the black person as negro. Okay. Whenever a person uses the word negro, we consider him or her as politically insensitive, okay, as racially insensitive or even racist. Though of course, the irony is that the black person uses the word nigger or negro within the black community, which is a different matter. Okay, you can turn this sort of slur phrase, and turn it into use it in such a way that you can use it only within your community, right. So, well, even today you find that the word black may not be accepted, okay, readily accepted. You find the increasing use of terms like Afro American, okay, to refer to blacks. Do you understand? So, we have words like blacklist, blackmail, etc. So, these words have been used over the years, but these have now come into question. Why? Because it refers, because of probably some people may will have the tendency to refer or to make some sort of a bizarre connection between black man and black male, for instance. Okay. So, these are some of, last but not the least, is we cannot leave our discussions about the information age, okay, and the impact it has had on the English language, right. So, let us read from the text here. English is the dominant language of the internet or the so called information superhighway, which links together networked computers all over the world. Although still in its infancy, the internet has led to the development of new types of text which require new skills. Conventional skills such as the ability to write prose are largely irrelevant, and this is to the advantage of the many users whose native language is not English. It is very important. Look at the last point made here, the kind of language, okay, and we cannot reiterate this enough, the kind of skill in the English language, the kind of mastery of the English language that was required, required for one to be known as maybe not just erudite in the language and its literature, but also somebody who could even where it could make a difference in one getting a job or not. Okay. Today that sort of mastery is something that need not be expected from somebody applying for a job on the digital platform. Okay. So, this is a very important point. The old kind of mastery of English, of its words, of its turns of phrases, for instance, are not today so important as far as the digital platform is concerned. Okay. As it says here, this is to the advantage of many users, particularly outside of the USA and outside of England. Okay. Those users of the language whose native language is not English today can know, we may use the word a different English with a different repertoire of words. Okay. So, that interestingly they are at par, okay, as far as jobs relating to the cyber world, to the internet are concerned. Okay. For instance, we also have words like byte, cyberspace, software, hacker, laptop, hard drive, database. These words were never there even if they were never there in the way that which we understand those words to mean. So, we will end with a quotation from a cultural history of the English language. Again, another very important interesting text if you want to know the history of the English language from the point of view of society and culture. And I will end with this quotation: within a generation of the invention of the computer industry was established on a global scale, using English as its language. As the computer culture has expanded into large scale databases, electronic mail or email and so on, the expansion of English has followed, and this technology is so designed that the user needs to interact in English. Individual programs can of course use other languages, but the program itself will almost certainly use English based commands. Whereas in previous technological revolutions, the technology has had to be adapted for different languages. In this case, languages other than English have to be interfaced with the resident language of the technology. So, if you look at the difference in these two things and what our main text is saying here and the text that we have from a cultural history of the English language, we may end by saying that English in the computer age is really Janus face. Janus face is Janus was an entity with two faces, okay, in mythology, in Greek mythology. Janus is an entity with two faces. So, this has two faces really. A is, as the cultural history of the English language says, that most of the work done on the internet, okay, is in English. It says that the computer culture has expanded into large scale databases. Expansion of English has also followed. Okay. So, that even if even if languages other than English are to be used, they have to more or less, let me put it, since I am not a person from computer science, okay, more or less, as this book mentions here, has to be interfaced with the English language. On the other hand, we also find that very importantly that the older way of knowing the English language, okay, for instance, you may have found people in previous generation, they are masters in the English language. I said they know the nuances, the turns of phrase, in long winding sentences. Many may know a Shakespearean play by heart. That sort of knowing of the English language is today no longer required, and is our main text says here, may be also at a great advantage for people whose native tongue is not English, but from the from the point of view of the computer industry. Okay, they will not fall behind just because they do not know an English of a more what should I use, of let us say of a different variety altogether from the previous generations. Okay. So, there is much really to be said, and I am aware, instead of saying so many things in very brief points about modern English, what I had decided here to do is to point to one aspect sorry, of modern English, which is vocabulary, right, because of course, vocabulary has throughout been a very important point in in particularly in the growth of the English language. You find as one of its pillars, really one of its most important rapidly growing phenomena, and is also of course phenomenon, sorry, of course almost like a law that that change in vocabulary is going to happen over change in time. But here we find an almost a remarkable way in which vocabulary has changed, particularly in the modern age with the phenomenal and very rapid growth of science and technology, beginning with the industrial revolution as we saw in the 17th-18th centuries, and science in the 17th-18th centuries, and culminating in the computer industry. Okay, having implications as we saw also of whether people may get a job, may have a job based on their knowledge of kind of English that they know. Okay. So, if you ask a question on say something like point out sorry, one of the most important areas in modern English, okay, that makes it different from its earlier age, then you would talk about vocabulary. If you are asked a question like name two socio-cultural or socio-political socio-cultural phenomena owing to which there was a rapid growth of technology, rapid growth of technology, yes, and the growth of vocabulary as far as English is concerned in the modern age. Then what are the answers? You know, A is industrial revolution and B is the growth of empire. Next, you may also be asked a question like bring out some of the attempts being made in America, okay, bring out some of the changes or differences as far as British English and American English is concerned. Of course, we have several books where we can go into detail, but the names we need to mention is one name specifically is that of Noah Webster in his attempt to prune or sort of clean certain extant words of their, what shall we call it, of their the overload of their letters. For instance, we found words, and you may get questions like cite certain words. Okay. Also, we found that we can also you can have questions on what happens when what are the words that have gotten into the English dictionary following empire, okay, and the colonization. Then you can talk about words from Native American. What are the words? We saw words like chipmunk, okay, even tomato, right, opossum, and words from Australia like boomerang, words from England like pajama, etc. Okay, bungalow, etc. So these are some of the questions that at this level, okay, remember this is a basic level course that we are bringing to you, and these are basic level, but however basic they may sound to you, it's always better to go back to basics, okay, and to recall some of the important things that we we have learned so far. So thank you, and end this lecture here, and the next lecture will be the last lecture on this in this module, and which is entitled The History of English in India. Thank you.